20-godišnja Sara Beckstrom, jedno od dvoje pripadnika američke nacionalne garde koji su u srijedu upucani u centru Vašingtona, podlegla je povredama. Izvori tvrde da je osumnjičeni koji je afganistanskog porijekla bio dio odreda smrti koje je obučavala CIA. Ukrajina je načelno postigla dogovor o mirovnom planu posredovanom od strane administracije Donalda Trumpa s ciljem okončanja gotovo 4-godišnjeg rata. Predstavnici Evropske unije se čvrsto protive sporazumu za koji vjeruju da nagrađuje Rusiju ukrajinskom teritorijom. Moja gošća večeras je ukrajinska parlamentarka Kira Rudik. Spasilačke akcije nakon katastrofalnog požara u hongkonškoj četvrti I PULS su okončane. Oko 200 ljudi i dalje se vodi kao nestalo. Poginulo je najmanje 128 osoba. Talijanski parlament usvojio je zakon kojim se femicid formalno uvodi u krivični zakon, kažnjavajući ga doživotnom zatvorskom kaznom. Zakon je dobio podršku i vladajućih i opozicije. Putin i Orban ove sedmice zajedno u Kremlju, dok Papa Lav XIV boravi u Turskoj i Libanu. Američko-ruska posada od 3 astronauta uspješno je u četvrtak lansirana ka Međunarodnoj svemirskoj stanici. Letjelica je pristala na ISS oko 3 sata nakon polijetanja. Posada će sada na stanici provesti oko 8 mjeseci. Pratite Puls planete, ja sam Iki Ferrer Gotić. Jedno od dvoje pripadnika američke nacionalne garde koji su u srijedu upucani u centru Vašingtona je preminulo od zadobljenih povreda, potvrdio to američki predsjednik Donald Trump. 20-godišnja Sara Beckstrom podlegla je povredama. Napadač, 29-godišnji Afganistanac Rahmanullah Lakanval, uhapšen je nedugo nakon pucnjave. Tužilaštvo je najavilo da će optužnica biti preinačena u ubistvo prvog stepena uz ocjenu da se radilo o planiranoj zasjedi. Oboje vojnika bili su raspoređeni u Vašingtonu u sklopu federalnih mjera protiv rasta kriminala. Napad je potaknuo nove najave administracije o obustavi obrada imigracijskih zahtjeva iz Afganistana i reviziji ranije izdatih zelenih karti. Beckstrom je u glavni grad doputovala kao dobrovoljac tokom dana zahvalnosti. Wolfe ostaje u kritičnom stanju.
Before we begin, I want to express the anguish and the horror of our entire nation at the terrorist attack yesterday in our nation's capital, in which a savage monster gunned down 2 service members in the West Virginia National Guard who were deployed as part of the DC task force, which has done such an incredible job. I mean, until yesterday, we literally had no incidents for many months. It was the safest place imaginable, and this is a different kind of crime. This is a really bad crime. Millions of Americans are praying for those heroes and their families, and I must unfortunately tell you that just seconds before I went on, right now, I heard that Sara Beckstrom of West Virginia, one of the guardsmen that we're talking about, highly respected, young, magnificent person, started service in June of 2023, outstanding in every way. She's just passed away. She's no longer with us. She's looking down at us right now. Her parents are with her.
Afganistanski izbjeglica optužen za ovo ubistvo nacionalne garde u Vašingtonu imao je prošlost u kontroverznoj jedinici, takozvanoj Zero Unit, paravojnoj formaciji, povezanoj s CIA-om, objavili su to izvori bliski istrazi. Osumnjičeni Lakanval, koji je u Sjedinjene države 2021. godine u okviru programa preseljenja afganistanskih saradnika stigao u Ameriku, ranije je učestvovao u noćnim operacijama ove jedinice, poznate po brutalnim racijama. Prijatelji tvrde da je patio od mentalnih problema i trauma zbog stradanja civila. Lakanval je u aprilu dobio azil, živio u saveznoj državi Vašington sa porodicom. Spasilačke akcije nakon katastrofalnog požara u kompleksu Bang Phu Court u hongkonškoj četvrti I PULS su okončane. Oko 200 ljudi i dalje se vodi kao nestalo. Poginulo je sada, prema saznanjima, najmanje 128 osoba, uključujući i jednog vatrogasca, dok je povrijeđeno 79 ljudi. Vlada je potvrdila da je 12 vatrogasaca ozlijeđeno, jedan teško. U zgradama je još 16 tijela, a 25 poziva za pomoć ostaje neriješeno. Pokrenuta je krivična istraga, 5 osoba je uhapšeno zbog sumnje na korupciju i nemar u vezi s radovima na renoviranju. Vi govorite o kompenzaciji, zar ne? Želio bih vam objasniti našu financijsku pomoć svim žrtvama i njihovim porodicama. Mislim da će naša vlada imati različite podrške za njihove porodice, a također razumijem da mnoge privatne organizacije rade na tome. Mislim da nam treba vremena da prikupimo sve detalje. Kao što sam rekao, neke od preminulih osoba još uvijek ne možemo u potpunosti identifikovati. Ruski predsjednik Vladimir Putin i mađarski premijer Viktor Orban sastali su se ovog petka u Kremlju, gdje su gotovo 4 sata razgovarali o ratu u Ukrajini i bilateralnim odnosima. Putin je izjavio da je američki predsjednik Donald Trump predložio održavanje rusko-američkih pregovora u Mađarskoj, ističući da bi, kako kaže, rado pristao na sastanak u Budimpešti. Orban je kazao da je spreman ponuditi Mađarsku kao platformu za dijalog, izazvavši nadu da će mirovne inicijative ipak donijeti rezultate. Putin je naglasio da odnosi Moskve i Budimpešte ostaju stabilni, posebno u energetskom sektoru gdje trgovinska razmjena i dalje raste. A Ukrajina je postigla načelni dogovor o mirovnom planu posredovanom od strane administracije Donalda Trumpa s ciljem okončanja gotovo 4-godišnjeg rata. Predstavnici pak Evropske unije se čvrsto protive sporazumu za koji vjeruju da nagrađuje Rusiju ukrajinskom teritorijom. Trump je dodao da pregovori napreduju i da je Moskva pristala na ustupke, dok njegov izaslanik uskoro putuje upravo u Moskvu radi novih razgovora. Predsjednik Sjedinjenih Američkih Država Donald Trump saopćio je da odustaje od roka da Ukrajina do četvrtka prihvati američki podržani mirovni plan. Istakao je da Rusija trenutno ima prednost na terenu te da bi Ukrajini koristio ovaj dogovor. Okončao sam 8 ratova u 9 mjeseci. Trenutno radimo na tom posljednjem ratu. Nije lako, ali znam da ćemo uspjeti. 25.000 vojnika je poginulo između Ukrajine i Rusije. Mislim da smo vrlo blizu dogovora. Za manje od godinu dana postigli smo više nego većina drugih administracija za 8 godina. Čvrsto vjerujemo da sigurnosne odluke koje se tiču Ukrajine moraju uključivati Ukrajinu. To je bio naš stav u Ženevi i uvijek je takav bio. Sigurnosne odluke u Europi moraju uključivati Europu. Isto važi za Kanadu, Japan, Australiju, Novi Zeland i druge zemlje kao i ostale članice. I to je jednostavno pravedno. I zapravo funkcioniše. Jer kada se nešto odlučuje iza leđa neke zemlje ili njenog naroda, uvijek postoji veliki rizik da jednostavno neće uspjeti. Izražena je nada da bi predsjednik Volodimir Zelenski mogao posjetiti Sjedinjene Američke Države prije kraja novembra kako bi finalizirao sporazum. Evropski zvaničnici se oštro protive raspodjelom ukrajinske teritorije. Da, želimo da ovaj rat što prije okonča, ali sporazum koji bi velike sile ispregovarale bez odobrenja Ukrajinaca i bez odobrenja Evropljana neće biti zasnovana za istinski održivi mir u Ukrajini. I zato je jedinstvo u Europi, jedinstvo s Ukrajinom, jedinstvo unutar Transatlantskog saveza sada presudno. Moramo biti jasni da ne može biti jednostranog komadanja jedne suverene evropske države i da se granice ne mogu mijenjati silom. Ako danas legitimiziramo i formaliziramo podrivanje granica, otvaramo vrata novim ratovima sutra i to ne smijemo dopustiti. Suverenitet također znači i mogućnost da sami birate svoju budućnost. Ukrajina je izabrala evropsku sudbinu koja je već dovela do djelimične integracije u naše jedinstveno tržište i našu odbrambenu industrijsku bazu, a to je tek početak puta. Budućnost Europe vezana je za budućnost Ukrajine i stoga budućnost Ukrajine leži u Europskoj uniji. To nije samo pitanje sudbine, to je ključni i suštinski dio svakog okvira sigurnosnih garancija i učinit ćemo sve što možemo da to zajedno i ostvarimo. Plan uključuje 28 tačaka koje pokrivaju i prekid vatre, povlačenje ruskih snaga, sigurnosne garancije, demilitarizaciju određenih područja, nadzor neutralnih posmatrača, ali i ograničenja za NATO integraciju Ukrajine. Dio prijedloga zahtjeva teritorijalne ustupke u Donjecku, što izaziva zabrinutost u Evropi, ali i kod saveznika NATO-a. Mirovni plan nije raspravljen u Abu Dabiju, nije još uvijek detaljno raspravljen ni sa kim. Vidjeli smo ga, predat nam je, ali nije bilo razgovora. U međuvremenu Rusija je intenzivirala napade na civilne infrastrukture u Ukrajini, tako oduzevši život preko 13 civila samo ove sedmice, a ranivši na desetine. All right, and we are continuing on this topic. The Trump administration has brokered a tentative peace proposal aimed at ending of Russia's nearly 4-year war on Ukraine, reportedly agreed to in principle by Kyiv, though European officials have expressed concerns over key aspects, including Ukraine's territorial integrity and NATO ambitions. Now, clock ticks toward a potential visit by President Zelensky to the United States to finalize the deal. Questions remain over whether Putin can be trusted, especially as he faces potential scrutiny from the International Criminal Court for his actions in Ukraine. And meanwhile, the human toll continues to mount, with civilian areas and populations deliberately targeted by Russia, resulting in widespread suffering and rising casualties. I'm being joined by the Ukrainian lawmaker and member of the parliament, Ms. Kira Rudik. Ms. Rudik is joining me from Kyiv. Welcome to the program and thank you for joining, Kira.
Hello, Ika, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Such an honor, Kira. You've always been one of the loudest voices coming out of Ukraine since the beginning of Russian invasion, advocating for strong international support and urgent actions. Before we dig into the peace agreement by Donald Trump, what do you believe are the most critical steps the international community must take right now in order to support your country?
First and foremost, the most critical point is for Europe and the United States to understand that Russia is a threat. To look at the facts and realize that no matter what everybody wants to believe in, Russians wouldn't stop unless they are stopped, and Ukraine is here to do that. So for us, the critical and the most important decision that needs to be made is about the security guarantees. This is why this 28 peace plan is so critical, because for the first time in history, Russia will maybe facing the security guarantees from the United States. We do not know the details yet, but this is the most important. Second point is, of course, making a decision on frozen Russian assets. We see that Russia never gave up on them, and Europe and the United States need to be really strong with not promising to return this money, but to use them for securing Europe, but also for rebuilding Ukraine. We didn't hear Russia wanting any sort of reparations or planning to do any sort of reparations. This is why we need to use the money that are in Europe's possession. And third point, which is also very important, is to strengthen European security and American security and collaboration. Because the result of Russian war in Ukraine will show the whole world if you can start the full-scale invasion in Europe, commit all kinds of the war crimes, and then get away with it. And I'm sure that there are many leaders of different regimes who are watching closely, because they can repeat what Russia has done in their own territories and also try to find a way to avoid this. And this is why it is very critical for us that the war ends on a just peace that will show the whole world that in 21st century the justice still exists.
Justice and just peace, let's talk about that. Now, given reports that the Trump administration's peace plan may require Ukraine to cede parts of, for example, Donetsk's region, including areas currently under Kyiv's control, how does Ukraine reconcile agreeing to such terms with protection of its full territorial integrity and sovereignty? And what message does this really send domestically and internationally about Ukraine's commitment to defending its borders?
So Ukraine has not agreed to cede any territories, and we didn't agree in recognizing temporary occupied territories as Russian. And I do not see a way how President Zelensky or anybody else could do that. There are two reasons for it. First is political and personal reason, which is this is our land. We didn't do anything wrong. We were brutally attacked by Russia, and we just fighting to protect what is ours, to protect our people, to protect our territories, and we are on the right side of the history. The second is a technical and judicial. So according to Ukrainian constitution, president can work on international arena, but he cannot personally agree to cede any territories. To change Ukraine's borders, there needs to be a referenda where people should agree to that. And the referenda can only be conducted when there is no martial law and there is no war going on. So I do not see even technically how one can assure that Ukraine can agree to something like that. And believe me, between Ukrainians who have lost so much, more than 80% of Ukrainian families has either someone fighting at the front line or have lost someone during this war. And so to imagine that we will just simply give up on our people or on our territories is just unthinkable. I do not think that there is a person in the world who can promise something like that.
And European officials have expressed skepticism as well, especially about aspects of the plan, particularly regarding territorial concessions and security guarantees that you are mentioning right now. Now, how will Kyiv ensure that it maintains broad international support and credibility among European partners while negotiating directly with Washington and Moscow?
We are very sure that it's in our European partners' interest for Ukraine to remain independent, sovereign, and to maintain our borders. Because if borders can be redrawn by an aggressive neighbor, then there are so many other countries in Europe who are under this threat. And we are telling the world that Putin wouldn't stop until he conquers all Ukraine. And not too many people believe that. But let me ask you this. In this plan, there was a limitation set on Ukrainian army and amount of people there. So if Russia doesn't plan to attack us anymore, why would they care how many people we have in our army? Why would they care which missiles we are producing if they do not think that they will be attacking us in the nearest future? I think this answers the question itself. And so when our international partners are concerned about how long the war would happen or for how long their societies will be able to maintain the support for Ukraine, I'm asking them a very simple question. What would happen if Ukraine fails? What would happen if we lose? Then Poland and many other countries will have Russia at their border. Then Russia will be much strengthened by Ukraine resources. And then the next chapter of war will be inevitable. So I think Ukraine is doing an amazing job defending the whole Europe, and we are willing to continue doing that, but we really need the support of our partners, and this support just cannot go away.
And Kira, the plan reportedly limits Ukraine's ability to pursue NATO membership as well. How does the Ukrainian government intend to safeguard its Euro-Atlantic ambitions under this deal, and what alternatives exist if NATO membership is effectively delayed or completely denied for Ukraine?
I think it's a disgrace for NATO if it would be possible that Russia puts a point where it forbids NATO to get Ukraine into its members, right? It's the strengths of alliance cannot be defined by an aggressor who say, all good, but you, NATO, do not take Ukraine in. However, we have seen that in the updates of 28-point plan, the formulation was changed from never joining NATO to Ukraine will join NATO when there is agreement of the members. We do not have this agreement just yet. So I think we will be okay with the formula that we will be waiting for the all NATO member states to get us in. However, NATO membership is one of Ukraine's strategic goals, and again, it is written in our constitution. So how is it possible that the external forces can rewrite our constitution? I do not see how that would happen in the nearest future.
And Kira, security guarantees that we mentioned in the beginning of this conversation are central to this proposal. But how does Ukraine plan to verify that Russia will comply with all aspects of this deal, particularly troop withdrawals, demilitarized zones, civilian protections? We've seen Russia's targeted civilian infrastructures. Only this week, more than 13 civilians have been killed around Kyiv region. What mechanisms are in place to address potential violations? And one simple question, Kira. Can Ukraine, Europe, United States, who brokered the deal, can they trust Putin in this deal?
Nobody can trust Putin. Moreover, Ika, we have proofs, we have facts. Since 2014, when Russia first attacked us, we have been at least a dozen ceasefire agreements or truce for some time, and Russia always violated their side. This is why right now this change is so critical when the United States first agreed that they will provide some security guarantees. What is unclear right now are, would they be sufficient to make us believe that the United States will protect us from Russia? I do not think that there are details just yet that will be assessed by our side and will be said, okay, this will work or this won't work. Because again, since 2014, when we were telling our international partners who brokered the previous agreements that Russia is violating them, there was just condemnation, worrying, and angry emails towards Moscow, but there was not a real step-by-step plan. And right now, there is also a threat that, for example, politically, in 5-10 years, things in the United States or in Europe will change, and then it will be harder to ensure that these security guarantees will be workable. This is why we are asking that any sort of security guarantees in the agreement need to be ratified by US Congress and by the national parliaments in the European Union, so that we would know that this is not a political, personal decision, but something that countries will commit to.
And Kira, civilians pay the highest price in this war, almost 4-year-long war. How do Ukrainians feel about the peace deal? How do they see their future at large?
Because there is no other nation that wants peace in this war more than Ukraine. And people are exhausted, people are tired, and people are miserable in so many ways. And we really want the war to be over as soon as possible. However, there is one thing that is worse than war, is to know that our children will have to fight it over and over. And that would happen if we do not stop Russia once and for all. So no matter how hard the situation is, we have chosen not to capitulate in 2022 when Russians were surrounding Kyiv and we had much less friends than we have right now. And we do not intend to capitulate right now. So Ukrainian people know what we are fighting for. And so if the deal will not be good for Ukraine, there will be no deal. And it's so terrifying how many war crimes Russia has committed here in Ukraine, including Ukrainian children who were kidnapped, including the attacks on kindergartens and hospitals and the wardens where women were giving birth. So it's just impossible to forgive. But we need to make sure that there is justice for all those people. And for the last couple of months, we haven't heard enough in media and by politicians saying that Ukraine still demands justice for everything that have been committed. But I want to reiterate here that nothing is forgotten and nothing is forgiven. And it is critical to have in this peace deal that the war criminals will be brought to justice.
And Kira, and of course, and we have to mention millions and millions of Ukrainians who are now refugees somewhere across Europe and across the world. I myself have followed the Ukrainian refugee crisis in 2022. I've seen tens of thousands of people, women with children, children with additional needs as well, elderly and sick, crossing the border at Medica, border with Poland as well. Those were apocalyptic pictures that we've seen. Do you think that Europe will be fair to Ukraine? Of course, Ukrainian future is in Europe, but of course, again, we are seeing a war in 21st century, something that my country has seen as well for 4.5 years as well. But justice somehow never came completely. Do you think Europe will be just when it comes to Ukrainian future in its own alliance?
That's a very complicated question. We need to work on it, and we know and we really regret that for so many conflicts that were beforehand, justice never came. And in effect, I think the result where people were able to commit war crimes and just generally crimes without punishment, this is what fires up the new conflicts and showing to the dictators of the world that they can do whatever they want and they just get away with it. Here on a refugee matter, you know, we have all just like a huge hole in our hearts, having relatives of loved ones who had to leave, who have to flee, and who had to start over in like just new places for them to restart their lives. And I want to use this opportunity and share the gratefulness for each family and every person who opened their homes to the ones in need, who supported with the clothes and food and protests and political will. So women and children who were in need were able to have a roof over their head and a warm cup of tea. This is very important, and what you have done for us is generational, something that we will not forget, but we will make sure that our children will not forget. The fact how people who didn't know each other at all had to become brothers and sisters, had to become one family, a huge European family, and also all over the world. This is very important that we continue talking about this, sharing gratefulness and ability at some point to pay this unpayable debt.
Unpayable debt, as you said. And considering, Kira, that President Vladimir Putin is currently under investigation by the International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes in Ukraine, how viable or legitimate is it to negotiate a peace deal directly with him?
If it was for us, we would not be negotiating any peace deal with him. And in Ukraine, we do not call him a president because there were no legitimate elections in Russia for a while. He is a leader of an authoritarian regime. However, it seems that new US administration seems feasible to invite him into the United States and shake his hands, though we know that so much blood of Ukrainian people and Russian people are covered on his hands. And so we just hope that the first thing that President Trump and European leaders will be able to get from him would be a ceasefire. This is something that will stop killings, at least at the peaceful cities, and will allow us to continue in negotiations. Also, we see that international organizations, the UN, International Criminal Court, many others, they prove their lack of willingness to go ahead and take many things to the end. And we were very disappointed in the reactions by the United Nations and by many others, especially when the full-scale invasion started. So let me tell you this. In 1943, nobody believed that Nazi will fail and that there will be a Nuremberg tribunal. But we have to continue pushing, and we have to get to the point where it will become real, no matter how hard and how unrealistic it seems right now.
Seems like there's no other option for Ukrainians than to keep fighting for the peace and membership in the EU as well. And how does Ukraine plan to balance the urgent need to end active hostilities with its long-term strategic goals, including deeper European integration and, of course, economic rebuilding? Are there safeguards in deal to prevent short-term concessions from undermining future Ukrainian ambitions?
So in 28-point plan, there were certain points that were implying that Ukraine will have a better path in joining EU. However, in the further negotiations, these plans were updated, and so again there were promises made that to accelerate Ukraine's process in joining EU and go ahead with opening EU markets, etc. However, if there is no security and stability, it will be very hard to bring capital here. It will be very hard to urge investments here to Ukraine. So security comes absolutely first in this matter. In the European integration process, Ukraine was working very well since 2022. I think we have done something that no parliament during the time of war was able to achieve. So we are moving really in a fast pace towards the European Union in terms of legislation. However, it wouldn't mean anything if there would be an ongoing conflict, and it wouldn't mean anything if there will not be changes in European Union that will allow its expansion. Because we know that even if by this point there would be a peace and Ukraine has done everything by the book, there will be still a question: is EU capable in this structure right now to accept Ukraine? And we know that there are limitations there as well.
And if NATO, we already mentioned the membership be restricted or delayed as part of this agreement, if that happens, of course, what role does Ukraine then envision for itself in a transatlantic alliance and broader European security architecture? And how will Kyiv maintain influence and security without full NATO protection if that is the end result of this peace deal?
So, first, we are still relying on the hope of the security guarantees from the United States. By the way, United States didn't sign any security guarantees deal with Israel or South Korea. However, or Taiwan. However, they are more or less protecting them from different attacks. And perhaps if there would be trust, there could be some setup for Ukraine. Then, if Ukraine is not joining NATO, in the short term, Ukraine can make security deals with nation states and promising to protect them on different levels. Ukraine right now has the strongest army in Europe, and Ukraine has the most advanced technological baseline for the defense from all of our partners. And of course, we are ready to share it, and we are ready to work with all our partners to make them stronger. So I see that there are ways that Ukraine can collaborate on this matter with European states. However, of course, NATO membership is preferable because it shows the overall agreement, it shows stability, it shows the strength of the alliance, and again, it gives all of us, not only Ukraine, a proper security.
And one last question for you. Implementing a deal, if it goes forward, of course, if it's signed by both parties, brokered by Trump's administration, a deal with difficult territorial security concessions and points could provoke domestic opposition. How does Ukraine plan to maintain political unity and public trust while executing potentially unpopular elements of this peace proposal?
So it's a very hard topic because before we see the plan in hand, we don't know if we can ratify it in Parliament or if we can go ahead and open it to people's impact, especially because many of the ways how people can represent their will cannot be maintained during the martial law. This is why we are insisting that the ceasefire needs to come first. However, let me give you an example of a deal that was not working for Ukraine at first. It was rare minerals Earth deal presented by President Trump's administration. At the very beginning, it was completely not something that Ukraine was able to support. However, after a couple of rounds of negotiation, it became acceptable and actually a very good deal both for Ukraine and United States. And not only President was able to support it, Prime Minister to sign it. It was ratified in Ukraine Parliament, and I was voting for it, and my party were voting for it. So if it's a good deal, then you will get support. If it's a bad one, perhaps President shouldn't agree to that because then he wouldn't pass it on to any other. As for Ukrainians and their ability to protest or to show their opposition, we had only once since the beginning of full-scale invasion when people went on the street to protest the attack on the Anti-Corruption Bureau. And people were showing that even during the wartime, they wouldn't just accept it, and because it closes our path to European Union. So yes, everyone who is trying to push a bad deal on Ukraine needs to remember that we are not Russia. Ukrainian people have voice, and they are not afraid to raise their voice if it's necessary. We have gone through many revolutions to be where we are right now and to be able to live in a free European democratic state. So everyone who is thinking about a really bad deal on Ukraine needs to remember that it will just not pass.
And Kira, before I let you go, you've been very vocal, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, for nearly 4 years. We've watched you in different media really speaking up for your country. How do you see the 4-year anniversary since Russia invaded Ukraine? And what is next for you? How do you see the future of your country and your role in it as well?
We survived. It's a miracle all in all. And this miracle happened because of so many brave men and women of Ukraine who are fighting and protecting us right now. I hope that at some point there would be peace. And at some point there will be an ability on a personal level to have a good night's sleep at home without a threat of waking up to Russian attacks and without a threat of being killed in your own bed by a Russian missile or drone. We will have a huge path ahead of us when the peace comes. The task would be making hard decisions for the country, working with our army, working on the economy and returning Ukrainian people and Ukrainian refugees from abroad. We will have to work 10 times harder than we are right now, and I'm sure that I will find my place in this new rebuilt Ukraine to do the best that I can. We know that only bad things happen quickly. For the good things, you have to work really hard, but same way as I believed in our country in 2019 when I was elected, in 2022 when there was the darkest hours, and right now when situation is really unclear, I'm hopeful that the same belief will guide me moving forward with God's help and Ukrainian people's help.
Thank you for speaking for Newsmax Balkans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ika, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you. Ruski predsjednik Vladimir Putin poručio je da se ukrajinske snage moraju povući ili će ih, kako kaže, razbiti ruska vojska. Tvrdio je da su ruske trupe okružile Pokrovski i Mirnograd. Dodao je da Zapad strahuje od urušavanja ukrajinskog fronta, ali i gubitka borbenih kapaciteta.
И до сих пор получаем заходы о прекращении боевых действий там. Войска Украины уйдут из занимаемых ими территорий, вот тогда и прекратятся боевые действия. Не уйдут, мы добьемся этого вооруженным путем. Вот все. Порядок. Там уже 1000 фур прошло. Я думаю, что те на Западе, кто понимают, к чему это может привести, настаивают на прекращении боевых действий как можно быстрее. И даже если это потребует от киевского режима каких-то уступок. Потому что понимают, начнется сворачивание фронта на отдельных участках. И тогда вооруженные силы Украины вообще утратят боеспособность. Они потеряют наиболее боеспособные части. Как это сейчас происходит в районе Красноармейска.
Учитывая... Вот
А вы же, по-моему, задавали какой-то вопрос.
Да.
Как вам не стыдно?
Разрешите, Владимир Владимирович?
Конечно, мы хотим договориться в конечном итоге с Украиной. Но это сейчас просто практически невозможно. Невозможно юридически. От них, кто может, кто хочет, тот пускай ведет переговоры. Нам нужно, чтобы наши решения были международно признаны основными международными игроками. Вот и все.
«Комсомольская правда». Вы уже отчасти ответили на этот вопрос, юридический вопрос. Про Крым и Донбасс.
Я не очень понимаю, почему большой семеркой называют и по количеству, и по территории, и по населению, и по вкладу в мировой ВВП. Они все меньше и меньше. Но неважно, это все равно важные наши партнеры. Ну, в сегодняшней ситуации я не очень себе представляю, как мы будем с ними вот так взаимодействовать напрямую. Ну, просто вы сами представляете, нет? Ну, приехали, здрасте, и чего, будем, насупившись друг на друга, посматривать, что ли? Со счет возможным принять наше приглашение, мы всегда ему рады. Мы сейчас хорошо знаем о коррупционном скандале в Киеве. То ли они это от европейцев учатся этому, то ли европейцы учатся у украинской верхушки. Но, во всяком случае, и то, и другое воровство. Мы так и относимся и готовим ответные меры. Но какие это правительство позднее обнародует, если это произойдет? Спасибо большое.
A stanovnici Hersona u južnoj Ukrajini žive u stalnom strahu od ruskih dronova koji prema Ujedinjenim nacijama namjerno gađaju civile. Svakodnevno se na grad šalje oko 300 dronova, a samo u oktobru letjelo ih je 9000. Dronovi ciljaju vozila, uključujući ambulante, a napadi su ubili više od 200 civila i ranili preko 2000. Ukupno je oštećeno ili uništeno skoro 3000 domova. Uprkos tome, ukrajinske snage neutraliziraju više od 90% dronova. Lokalne porodice i dalje se nadaju primirju, ali svaki dan žive pod stalnom prijetnjom iz zraka. Ukrajinci ovo nazivaju ljudskim safarijem. Prije samo nekoliko dana od 8 do 13 sati zabilježili smo upotrebu 250 FPV dronova. To je unutar Hersona i Hersonskog okruga. Ima ih mnogo više. Koriste ove dronove gdje god hoće. Jednostavno udare gdje žele. Letjeli su, razumjeli da im baterija slabi i morali su udariti negdje. Svaki dan napadaju civile, nije važno da li se radi o baki ili djedu, bilo da idu biciklom ili nečijim kolicima. Postoji video potvrda. 10 minuta do 1 ili u 1 ujutro čula sam udar i okvir kreveta pao mi je na noge, a ormar je stajao. Sve se sručilo na moje noge. Sve moje stvari su bile zatrpane. Bila sam histerična. Nisam mogla pronaći dokumente, moje stvari, ništa. Sve je bilo zatrpano. Toliko nas bombarduju. Svi su prozori u mojoj kući razbijeni, mene i mojih susjeda. Ovdje svašta preživljavamo. 93% ruskih dronova ne dostiže svoje odredište i ne izvršava dodijeljeni zadatak. Taj trend raste iz mjeseca u mjesec. Prošlog mjeseca proizveli su 5000 dronova, u oktobru skoro 10.000. Taj broj je zaista ogroman. Izraelska vojska objavila je u petak snimke za koje tvrdi da prikazuju napad na naoružane osobe u selu na jugu Sirije. Sirijski državni mediji navode da je u izraelskoj operaciji ubijeno 9 ljudi, a više ih je ranjeno, dok su deseci porodica izbjegli iz ovog područja. Izraelska vojska saopćila da su njene trupe djelovale kako bi uhapsile militante, da je 5 izraelskih vojnika povrijeđeno, uključujući 2 teško. Napetosti traju od kako je Bašar al-Asad svrgnut 2024. godine, a dvije zemlje pregovaraju o mogućem sigurnosnom sporazumu. Kontroverzna humanitarna fondacija za Gazu koju su podržavali Sjedinjene države i Izrael obustavila je sve operacije nakon skoro 6 mjeseci rada. Objavile su to svjetske agencije. Organizacija je ranije zatvorila 3 centra za distribuciju hrane otvorena tokom rata. Ujedinjene nacije i druge agencije odbile su saradnju tvrdeći da je njihov sistem neetičan i nesiguran. Stotine Palestinaca poginulo je u haosu oko lokacije ove fondacije, većinom izraelskom vatrom, navodi to UN. Palestinski ambasador pri Ujedinjenim nacijama upozorio je da uprkos primirju nasilje i ograničenja pomoći i dalje traju.
Prekid vatre mora biti u potpunosti očuvan i poštovan. Ništa ne može opravdati što je 1000 Palestinaca ubijeno ili ranjeno od početka prekida vatre. Ništa ne može opravdati da se od početka primirja svakog dana 2 palestinske djece ubije od strane Izraela. Izrael želi urušavanje prekida vatre jer nastavlja provoditi 3 stvari koje mu je Trumpov plan uskratio, a to je prisilno raseljavanje, okupaciju i aneksiju. Pokušava postići isto tako što usporava ulazak humanitarne pomoći, obnavlja svoje napade i što je najvažnije pokušava učvrstiti žutu liniju ili čak napredovati izvan nje. Izrael će nastaviti poštovati svoje obaveze iz plana, ali nećemo klijevati da neutraliziramo neposredne prijetnje našim građanima i našim vojnicima. Ostajemo fokusirani na postizanje naših ciljeva, a to je vraćanje naših zarobljenih talaca kući i osiguravanje da Hamas bude razoružan.
Talijanski parlament usvojio je zakon kojim se femicid formalno uvodi u krivični zakon, kažnjavajući ga doživotnom zatvorskom kaznom. Zakon je dobio podršku i vladajućih i opozicije. Vlada premijerke Giorgie Meloni reagovala je na niz ubistava i nasilja nad ženama, a upravo je ona predložila ovu izmjenu zakona. Novi propisi pooštravaju i kazne za zlostavljanje, progon i osvetnički pornografski sadržaj. Zakon je usvojen pod pritiskom javnosti na Dan borbe protiv nasilja nad ženama.
Važno je biti ovdje danas jer kao i svake godine ovo nije dan proslave, već dan borbe. Borbe za naša prava. Važno je biti ovdje, biti prisutan, boriti se i učiniti sve da se naš glas čuje. Situacije postaju sve gore i gore. Postoji strašna napetost, čak i na međunarodnom nivou. Zato smatramo da je ispravno boriti se za odbranu ženskih prava.
A broj poginulih u poplavama u južnom Tajlandu dosegao je najmanje 145, saopćili su to zvaničnici ovog petka, dok se povlačenje voda otkriva i razarajuću štetu. Poplave izazvane jakim kišama pogodile su 12 južnih provincija, uključujući 1,2 miliona domaćinstava. U provinciji Satun uništeni su putevi i kuće, dok stanovnici vraćaju se u svoje poplavljene domove, pregledavaju štetu, pronalazeći namještaj i stvari razbacane po podu. Papa Lav XIV pozvao je malu katoličku zajednicu u Turskoj da pronađe snagu u svojom brojnosti tokom ključnog dana prve posjete zemlje usmjerene na jačanje kršćana i promicanje jedinstva. Dočekan je u Istanbulskoj katedrali Duha Svetoga povodom obilježavanja 1700. godišnjice Nicejskog sabora u Izniku. Papa je ranije pozvao na mir tokom susreta s predsjednikom Erdoganom, a u nedjelju putuje u Liban.
I ovdje učimo važnu lekciju. Kršćanska vjera uvijek se mora izražavati jezikom i pojmovima kulture u kojoj živimo. Istovremeno moramo razlikovati bit vjere od historijskih formula koje nas izražavaju. Formule koje su uvijek djelimične, ali i privremene, te se mogu mijenjati kako se doktrina dublje razumije. Podsjetimo da je najnoviji crkveni naučitelj, sveti John Henry Newman, inzistirao na razvoju kršćanske doktrine, jer doktrina nije apstraktna, statična ideja, već odražava samo tajstvo Krista. Stoga je njen razvoj organski nalik razvoju živog bića, koje postepeno otkriva i sve potpunije izražava samo srž vjere.
Američko-ruska posada od 3 astronauta uspješno je u četvrtak lansirana ka Međunarodnoj svemirskoj stanici. Raketa nosač Sojuz poletjela je u zakazano vrijeme s ruskog kozmodroma Bojkonur u Kazahstanu noseći letjelicu Sojuz MS-28 s astronautom NASA Chrisom Williamsom te ruskim kozmonautima Sergejem Mikajevom i Sergejom Kud-Svečkovim. Letjelica je pristala na ISS oko 3 sata nakon polijetanja. Posada će na stanici provesti oko 8 mjeseci. Williams, fizičar, i Mikajev, vojni pilot, lete u svemir prvi put, dok je Kud-Svečkov ovo drugi put. Na ISS-u će se pridružiti astronautima NASA i kozmonautima. NASA je saopćila da će Williams provoditi naučna istraživanja i tehnološke demonstracije usmjerene na unapređenje budućih misija i koristi na zemlji.
Good structural stability on the rocket.
Тангаж, рысканье, вращение в норме.
Passing through the area of maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle, max Q as it's called. And the view inside the descent module showing Kud-Svechkov at the bottom. To his left, Sergei Mikhaev. Mark.
We confirm
The launch shroud encapsulating...
Toliko u Pulsu planete za ovu sedmicu. Ove i ostale informacije možete dalje potražiti na našem sajtu newsmaxbalkans.com. Se vidimo naredne sedmice. Hvala za pažnju i doviđenja.